Muy buenos días, buen día. Good morning, everyone. Me han dicho que ayer fue espectacular.
I was told yesterday was fabulous, so let's talk about that. 2 weeks ago, everything was on fire when the Paris Saint-Germain trainer, the Magid and Garcia, I don't know whether you saw this or not, a journalist which was quite sensible, asked them a sensible question and challenged them to, ask them why they were flying from Nantes to Paris on a private jet when they could travel on train. And this is a relevant question, and people were annoyed, and fairly so, because this private jet trip emits the same amount of CO2 to the atmosphere that we will be emitting in a whole year, and the same amount of CO2 that farmer from Uganda will emit in his whole life. So climate justice is unjust, unfair. There's a huge lack of balance between those who are emitting and those who are living the direct consequences. Today, the 1% of the richest population is emitting more CO2 to the atmosphere than those who are emitting 50% of the poorest part of the population. And however, the reality is that things are changing at an incredible speed. More and more people are aware of how serious and urgent the situation is, and not only are we aware of how serious and what an emergency this is, but we're focusing on the solutions. We are lots of future fixes, millions of us, and we are unstoppable. So if we think about climate activists from Guatemala, Venezuela, or any of the countries from Asia, the Philippines, people who are risking their lives daily to defend the environment and the planet's sustainability, leading women from the Amazons, carers of forests and rivers and waters who speak up and want to be in the political decision-making spaces, African farmers, young people from all around the world, scientists, entrepreneurs, thousands of people who are confident that another world is possible. And Kathy was saying we are still very far away, and we know this. We're far from that threshold of 1.5 degrees. We have governments who are fleeing from their responsibilities, and they're dangerously leading on to the 2.7 degrees. We need to rewrite our future. We need to leave this neoliberal model behind, which is racist and sexist and violent, and it's simply making some people richer unstoppably, and we need to go towards the opposite, an economy that is focused on people and the sustainability of the planet. And in order to do all that and to talk about climate justice, I am very happy to have two wonderful people who are committed. They are professional activists. Gabriela Bucher, Executive Director of Oxfam International. Good morning, Gabriela. And also Yayo Herrero, eco-feminist activist, anthropologist, engineer. It is an absolute luxury to have the two of you here today. Gabriela grew up in Colombia, and throughout her career has achieved equality and
tiene una larguísima trayectoria en Colombia, donde trabajó codo con codo durante décadas para luchar para defender la paz y implicar a los jóvenes, y desde hace un par de años lidera
young people involved, and for 2 years now
Oxfam,
she's leading the Oxfam Confederation, a network of organizations that precisely want to fight against the consequences of climate change, but not only that, also to report the causes that have led us onto this path. And you know that we have reported the governments of France and Spain precisely because of climate inaction. And Yayo Herrero, luxury to have you here with us, one of the most influential voices, I would say now, in ecofeminism and political ecology here in Europe. And I think she's written over 30 books around that figure. She's also a lecturer in many universities. You have probably seen her on the the media. Yayo fights from the classrooms and demonstrations on the street, but also from boards of companies. She has been for decades rethinking the political, economical, and social discourses to precisely place life at the center of our future, and she combines that professional activity with her active participation in social movements. She's also part of Ecologistas en Acción and Garúa Cooperative. So in 2 seconds we will hear from Gabriela so that she can start with some initial thoughts, and then we will have Gabriela and Yayo holding a conversation, and there's real magic will happen. So Gabriela, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Frank, for your introduction. It's fabulous to be here together with Yayo and everyone in the audience. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I wanted to start by saying that we talk about climate change and climate crisis, but why are we talking about that? Because at the end of the day, this is not about climate. Climate change is just one of the symptoms of a system that is collapsing and is not wanting to die. It is an ill-designed system from the very beginning, ill-designed with an intention to nourish the interests of some. That is the 1% of the world's population that makes the entire economy work in their own benefit. Rich people, multinationals, rich countries, and this capitalist system, which is heteropatriarchal, colonialist, is not compatible with life, does not respect people or the planet or nature, and destroys all the systems that sustain life. It attacks life face on, and climate change is one more indicator of this incompatibility, a very serious one, by the way, but also the loss of biodiversity, pollution, also discrimination and violence against women and girls and marginalized groups. This is based on the idea that endless growth is possible in a planet with finite resources that we must respect. This is a system designed for that 1%. This is a system based on domination, abuse and use of resources, and violation of rights. And we see this every day on our screens. The most recent one is the floods in Pakistan, droughts in East Africa, a region that suffers from a great famine. This is also combined with rises in food prices and fires, heat waves, and colder winters, summers, and extreme changes in the climate situation and energy situation too. The fires in the Amazon forest in Australia in 2020 last year, the tropical storms and hurricanes, the strongest ones and more frequent ones too. Climate impacts are now the day-to-day in our planet, in all continents, affecting the most vulnerable more. And in a report published yesterday, Oxfam pointed out that in 10 of the most affected countries by climate change, they have had an increase of 123% of severe famine in the last 6 years. Somalia, Haiti, Djibouti, Kenya, Niger, Afghanistan, Guatemala, Madagascar, Burkina Faso, and Zimbabwe. 48 million people who are in severe famine situations versus the 21 million people in 2016. And 18 million people out of these are at the edge of famine. Hunger is intensified by climate change and is a clear symptom of this extreme world inequality. The countries that are the least responsible of the climate crisis are not only ones that are suffering from it the most, but are the least prepared to face them. So those 10 countries together only generate 0.16% of world emissions, carbon emissions, and all these are in the third of the least prepared countries to face climate change. On the opposite, industrialized and polluting countries, such as the G20 countries controlling 80% of the economy, are responsible all combined of over 3/4 of the world's carbon emissions. And the leaders of these countries continue to support the polluting companies that in many cases are the ones that provide support to their electoral campaigns. On average daily, out of the profit made by hydrocarbon companies in the last 50 years goes up to $2.8 billion. The profit for those companies in less than 18 days would be enough to finance all the UN interventions, humanitarian interventions, $49 billion. So 18 days of additional profit of hydrocarbon companies would be solving humanitarian crises around the world. Fixing the future and reinventing the future is reinventing our systems, the systems and the ways we relate to each other. Sometimes we place a lot of emphasis in reducing emissions, and that is essential, especially in rich countries and wealthy countries. We often place a lot of emphasis in individual transformation, but what we must do is a transformation of economies and societies to ensure social justice, gender justice, and racial justice, amongst other intersections. The climate financing system is a clear example of this hypocrite and colonialist system, which divides North and South. 2022 is, in theory, the year when the implementation of the famous Paris Agreement start up and the plans defined for all countries. Not only financing is ridiculous and tiny in the face of the needs. Based on a recent Oxfam study in Western Africa, up to now, only 7% of the identified needs in the climate action national plans are funded, and the worst thing is that 80% of these funds are loans that the poorest countries will have to give back to many other loans that they have had to take out in recent years, given the pandemic. Also, rich and wealthy countries with historical responsibility on global warming do not want to repair the damages or losses, neither the ones in the past or the ones in the present or the ones that are yet to come. The Egyptian presidency of COP27 was going to repair the debt. That is a step forward, but we haven't won this battle over because the concept that we are already facing situation of losses that requires a financing system is not accepted. This system does not support the people who lose their livelihoods. I'm thinking about the fishermen of the Chad Lake. It disappeared, dried up by climate change, most of it, and people are not considering the differentiating needs of women, for instance, those affected by discriminatory legislation that excludes them from accessing resources and participating in decision-making processes. In the dry corridor of Central America, now women have to travel further to get water and spend more time taking care of family members because of diseases such as dengue or Zika, because the epidemic has risen, because of climate change. Responsibilities increase for women in a society that is still discriminating them, because they cannot be owners of the land in many countries. This system is excluding the voices that question it, and with incredible brutality. In the next COP in Egypt, the first one in the African soil will be in Sharm el-Sheikh, an exclusive island in a convention center where the Egyptian society and civil society in general will have the possibility, very limited access possibilities. So with Oxfam, we fight so that affected communities by climate crisis can be part of this process, organizing agendas and participating in the decision-making process. The voices of people in the most affected communities must be heard, including all the women and non-binary girls from indigenous villages, dysfunctional and groups and other marginalized groups, because to date many of the solutions and strategies that are being set forth are not being taken into account. We see people suffering from the impacts of climate change, this multi-phase crisis, this system crisis. We see wealthy countries, wealthy people, multinational companies flee from their responsibilities and continue placing profit above people. But we also see energy from so many different projects led by people who are building up change, people who analyze, who work, share, interrupt unfair processes and report them, even risking their lives in many cases. And I'm thinking about Camila Bustos from my own country, Colombia, part of a group that won over an innovative report against the government because of deforestation in the Amazon forest. This was the first round in Latin America against a state requesting a future without environmental tragedies, and they won over the lawsuits, and this requires the implementation of this. I'm thinking about Elizabeth Oguti in Kenya, a country where the absence of rain is leaving lots of people in critical situation because of lack of food. Elizabeth is calling upon world leaders to act and ensure that the most affected communities can receive the help that they need, providing funds to face the losses and damages they have suffered. And together with these projects compatible with life and all the rights of everyone, that's from when I'm speaking, effective and efficient projects, feminist, fair, and perfectly placed projects. And it's on this side, the side of young women who are putting pressure all around the world, changing the mindsets and building the future they want, defining new frameworks, new views, new success indicators, new paths for development in a fair and safe place for humanity. We are here to dare to invent this future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gabriela. Good morning, everyone. It's a huge pleasure to participate in this space, to have a conversation with Gabriela and to see you all, although virtually. And Gabriela, the level of coincidence with what you're saying is huge. And I was backing many of the things you said. I would like to pick out some of them to start our conversation. You say that we're not only before a climate element here. I think it's very relevant that you mentioned we're not only in front of a climate issue. We have the tangible evidence of a clash, face-to-face clash between the logic sustaining life, the logic of nature we're part of, unavoidably as a human species, and the economic logics that has been installed in recent centuries, but extremely intensely in the last decades with the new turn of the screw, neoliberal turn of the screw of capitalism. So besides the problems you mentioned, I also wanted to stress, because, well, this is essential from the standpoint of understanding the biophysical translimitation of this planet, the deep climate and energy crisis that we have, an energy crisis that is not only determined by, as well, Ukraine war is setting forth. Obviously, this is a very crucial factor, but it is also determined by the overcoming, well, by the extraction of oil, of carbon, natural gas, over the possibilities of maintaining the model. I think this is important because we can be misled by the idea of thinking of alternatives that at some point depend on the extraction of many other minerals that are located in these indigenous towns and villages and the land inhabited by people who are precisely suffering the consequences of climate change the most. This excess of physical limits also makes us think and try to understand the extractivism processes and having people fleeing from their places of origin. Forced migration is something that we see, people who have to flee their habitats because they can no longer be there. And we also see how the borders of Europe and in other places of the world put up super high walls, and they spent a lot of money controlling the borders. And if they were closed to materials, energy, and food, as they are closed to people coming from the places where the energy and materials are coming from, we would see that our own wealthy Europe wouldn't be able to stand by for not even a week. So those areas that are developed, the privileged areas, are already living for many years now, but now in a re-intensified way they are living at the expense of natural resources and goods from other territories, causing revitalization of neo-colonial practices and activities, and also a destruction, absolutely massive destruction of ecosystems that we need simply to continue living. I think that this is something very relevant, and that is where we find everything that you mentioned, which I agree with, which is companies. I am living in Cantabria in Spain, in the north of Spain, and these days we're seeing how here and in the rest of Europe people have their electricity bills and they find they can no longer pay for them. Not people that are unemployed or who are particularly vulnerable, but I'm talking about people who have an employment and cannot guarantee their own needs. Basically what is happening is that companies who present these bills and cut off the power if you don't pay them, they're the same companies that in Latin America and Africa, they're extracting minerals, extracting energy, they're owning rivers, and they're driving people away, and they use violent actions that are, well, end up killing people. And villages are getting organized and are trying to resist these actions, on occasions led by women. So this is my first topic of conversation, and then we can continue maybe talking along the lines you prefer. Yes, I totally agree. And the first thing I think is that how important and marvelous it is to have people who are rethinking the system and how we can organize ourselves differently, because there's this idea that this orthodoxy of the system is the only way of getting organized, and that's not the case. This is a system that is actually failing and missing most of us, and it's key to our survival as a species. It's not a system that makes sense anymore, and we have to rethink it from its basis and think about the incentives, what the incentives are. We think of successful economies when there's growth in GDP. This means that there's greater welfare and well-being, but we see that there's greater differences between those results that are celebrated and the reality of people, and increasing awareness that this makes no sense, and that, as you were saying, is extractive and non-sustainable. And in the case of energy companies and the situation that we see nowadays in so many countries, most of what we've seen in developing countries in other parts of the world and the global south is now also seen in Europe. And we still having this vision that the business model is fine, it's all right for companies to have these extraordinary profit they've been having during the pandemic too, and now during the Ukraine conflict too. And here in Oxfam we have a proposal. We must have tax on these, or apply tax on these over-dimensioned profits. This is a pragmatic solution for the current crisis in Europe, but this is a way also to redistribute this revenue that is so much concentrated in a small group of companies and people. These are big companies tax but we're also talking about tax to capital and wealth, and this is the only way of being aware that the 1% that consumes the most consumes on average 30% above what would be compatible with this increase of 1.5 degree, because we know that with 1.2, which is where we are having huge catastrophes and disasters already, so action must be fast and swift, and this involves reducing emissions of the wealthiest people and countries. Yes, absolutely. Before, you were talking about how there's a problem of a model, not just a problem of some little nuances and touches and actions. Maybe we're placing too much of a focus on, we of course must do this because this is an emergency on climate change, but we also need to think about the model. These days, for instance, we have been following all the movements of Rebelión Científica, scientific rebellion, which is a movement, a very significant movement, because the land of university and academia and knowledge, they play a very important role too. I come from culture, Western culture, which is a culture that learned to look at the world and nature and other people from externality, from above, and from how instrumental everything is. And we might need some scientific models. We need them for sure. But we need them to be humble. We need them to understand that there are other lands, other villages who have known how to develop a science that has allowed them to live in harmony with the forest, resources, rivers, and that perhaps there's a lot we can learn from how other villages learn and make science. This scientific rebellion is very significant for me because we have, in recent years, experienced some seasons full of reports and news saying that we were doing worse and worse, but nothing seemed to happen. I feel huge solidarity with all these researchers who go out in the street because they believe that from the academia field they feel they should be doing more and having or being more involved or having more radical discourse in its demand for this change of a model. And as I was pointing out before regarding economy, the capitalist economy has transformed into a civil religion, a sort of civil religion. And it's as if anything can be sacrificed if the economy grows. So the sacred goal of economic growth legitimates for the economic activity to do away with forests and rivers and the environment and people, and having people being exploited all around the world, and human labor. And here I agree with what you were saying. I'm not only talking about paid work or labor, but daily sustainment of life that women have been doing because of patriarchal imposition. And worldwide, you were talking about how difficult it is to get water or firewood in many places, but in many cities where people are evicted from their homes, people who can't pay for their homes, they have to queue up to go to social services, to request the different aids or food. These are mostly women too. Mostly women who are sustaining life in systems that attack life itself. So this is also work, and we have to place a focus on it and make it a priority, because this is the work that sustains our livelihoods.
So in that economy that visibilizes everything that makes monetary indicators rise and that hides and exploits because it needs all of the hidden side of things, working communities, extraction of resources from the earth, that needs to change necessarily. Because if we don't do that, the urge to grow these economic indicators at the expense of the animals, the plants, the earth, what it does is it destroys or eliminates or makes existence conditions in the future so much more difficult. The good side of this is that it is not true that there are no alternatives, and the work of Oxfam, for example, that I have been appreciating for a very long time, and the work done from many different places and social movements is about proposals oriented towards economic models that are solidary, social and solidary economic models, and also ways of learning and knowing and relating that are or that develop in universities or public institutions. But I would mainly point out everything that organized civil society is doing in the past decades, from movements, protesting on the streets, Youth for Climate, Extinction Rebellion, or even the action of indigenous peoples, farmers, movements, or cities for the defense of life. And they propose initiatives, models, alternatives that I think can be experience laboratories to build models that are radically different. Yes, and it starts with a completely different value scale, valuing everything that had been disregarded from the capitalist perspective and that colonial model which exploits all resources, including women considered as resources to be exploited. And these forms compatible with life have always been there, but they have not been appreciated. And on the positive side of things, we are now seeing movements that are very strong, and we will hear from many of those people who are active youth who are showing us different possibilities for the future, and they go back to the roots of a past where there was a lot of compatibility with the environment, and back in the day they weren't really valued. So the idea is to find this new balance, but to actively dismantle this system which is on race towards destruction. And we are a majority of people who can mobilize in the different countries to get that change which is really possible. It's really possible to exercise citizenship in a different manner, to take into consideration this solidary vision of society and this scientific rebellion which is taking place vis-a-vis a model that does not include us. And for that, the consciousness and the awareness of rich countries and the importance of repairing the damage is very important, because these are damage that has been caused in 200 years of industrialization, and we increasingly see more clearly that it is affecting people who had nothing to do with that global warming, with that climate effect. And that is what climate justice is based on: repairing and respecting and understanding these other ways of relating to nature. Gabriela, Yayo, thank you so much for this conversation. I wanted to close by asking you a question. You were very eloquent in your diagnosis. Words came up such as rebelliousness, consciousness, action, that I think speak to us all. Scientific rebellion, but also citizen rebellion. We have 50 years of experience and evidence, and however, we are again at the gates of a new COP29. It's difficult to have hope in these COPs. We are already tired of this lack of responsibility by the companies and governments really facing the music. And what can we expect of that COP, and what do we focus on so that this transition is actually a fair transition, and so that we look at those nuclear elements that are
las causas, ¿no?
the causes, the underlying causes of this climate crisis. So what do we ask of politicians in 2 months' time?
Les pedimos que se vayan.
Do we just ask them to leave? As an activist that I am, I must acknowledge that I don't really have any trust in them, especially because of what has been happening, and because even in these circumstances that are so absolutely pressing, where the symptoms and ailments of the crisis are so obvious, I for myself don't yet see any boldness to speak clearly about the source of the problems and to really get down to work with the structural causes and to solve them. But what I do see is that year after year, around COP or the alternative COP that takes place, and throughout the year, there are networks of civil society being woven and more people become active to make these demands. Because I believe that it is difficult that institutional politics will do anything that needs to be done if citizens are not organized and aware to make them actually conduct these changes. And I think it is a very important political stage around which people organize during the COPs outside of the gated areas, and there are other venues that activate imagination and creativity which we need at this point, and there I do see something different. And I think that these movements know how to come out of a narrative which starts being completely dystopian. It's amazing to see how many politicians are saying we are going to have an awful autumn of famine and cold without doing anything about it. And I think this debate becomes completely conservative. A philosopher said we would rather understand the end of the world than the end of capitalism, and I think the authors are understanding how to create utopia, as Paulo Freire said, something that has not happened yet but is feasible, and they are starting to project desired horizons that may be compatible with the material reality that we have. This is where my greatest hope lies, and there I do see significant steps, and I see how alliances come up between different people from different territories, different generations, different geographical origins, different circumstances that allow for hope, or at least that's the active hope that helps me get out of bed every morning and get to work. I agree that hope is in these citizen mobilizations, and I would like to briefly add something. So hope is there in those different possibilities, and to add to this hope, I see that there's a different possibility that has taken place in Latin American countries stemming from these demonstrations and this rebellion. It is a potential wave, a potential tide that will transmit to the rest of humanity. And in the previous COP, when I saw the presentations of female delegation leaders, they spoke from a different perspective and very boldly, and they are from small areas representing small islands that are the most affected by the climate crisis. But these are powerful voices that I hope will have more projection in COPs, and from those positive aspects that we see in citizenship and in some governments that start to show these progressive views. From all that, we can build this new reality. Thank you very much, Gabriela. Thank you very much, Yayo. I think you inspired us. You gave us elements, very powerful elements, in this reflection that goes beyond the climate crisis and is related to a neoliberal model which is sexist, racist, violent, and that we should uproot. And I agree with you, Yayo. Let's do away with capitalism, not the world, because capitalism is 50 years old. We can kill it, and we need to reinvent it. We need to bust this system. And to continue to talk about all this, I will pass the floor over to Sandra Sotelo, who is advisor within Oxfam, within my team, in resilience and gender topics. Aside from being an expert in all of these topics, she is an artist, a creator, and she has combined these two sides within climate activism. She will join us throughout the next session. She will guide us throughout the next session, and she's over there. Sandra, I'm introducing you. I'm doing the honors. Are you coming or not? So I'll leave you in the capable hands of Sandra Sotelo.
Muchas gracias.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bueno, voy a empezar. Buenos días.
Well, good morning.
Voy a empezar en castellano,
I'll
después
start
vamos
in
a
Spanish
cambiar
and
de
then we will
idiomas a lo largo
switch
del
languages
panel.
throughout the panel.
En este panel vamos
And
a
in
hablar
this
de
panel we will be
justicia
talking
climática
about climate
a través
justice
del activismo
through
de líderes globales,
the activism of global
que tenemos el gusto
leaders that we have the
tener
pleasure of
en
having
presencia digital o
here
en persona aquí hoy,
remotely or in person.
y es un lujo, ¿no?
And
A
it
mí
is a luxury.
me ha encantado la cita que hacía,
I loved
que
the
hacía esta
quotes
mañana.
this
Porque
morning,
realmente ser un
because
activista climático
being a
hoy
climate activist
es
today
tener que ir en
means
contra de una ley que es injusta. Entonces
going
obliga a la
against an
disrupción,
unfair
a la
law, so it
transgresión, a la
makes us be
rebeldía
transgressive,
y
it
a
makes us rebel,
aportar muchísimo,
and it
muchísimo
makes us
arrojo, como decía Yayo, a todo el trabajo
really
que eso
be
implica, ¿no?
brave and courageous in all of our work.
Y es transgresor
As Yayo
porque
said.
se está
And it is
planteando un
transgressive
cambio
because
en
we are proposing
la
a
forma de
change
relacionarnos
in the way we relate to
con
one another,
nosotros
with
mismos,
ourselves,
con
the
nosotras
way we
mismas,
relate to
con
ourselves,
el otro,
the way we
en
relate
sentido
to
amplio,
others in the
y
broad sense,
con el entorno,
and
con el
with
planeta.
our environment, the planet.
¿Os acordáis la cita de
Do you
un
remember the
pueblo
quote?
indígena que decía,
An indigenous people that said,
no estamos defendiendo la naturaleza,
we're not defending
somos la
nature,
naturaleza
we
defendiéndose?
are nature defending itself.
Esta cita
And
nos
this
coloca en
quote
nuestro sitio.
puts us in our
Y
place
es tan transgresor en
it
términos
is so transgressive
del lugar,
in
el
terms
lugar en
of
el que
the
te estás
place
situando,
where you place yourself,
que esto es lo que estos disruptores
that these disruptors,
activistas
these
climáticos
climate activists,
a nivel mundial están planteando. No es casualidad,
are
y luego
proposing
hablaremos
this
con él,
worldwide.
con
It
Magid,
is no
que su
coincidence.
libro
We'll
se
talk to
titule
Magid.
The Art
His
of
book is
Disruption.
The Art of Disruption, so it's no coincidence that that's the title.
Otra cosa que quería comentaros en cuanto a la,
Something
a
else
la
I wanted to tell you
transgresión
about transgression
es que lo que es curioso
is that what's
es
interesting
que haya que
is
ser rebelde y
that
transgresor
we should be a rebel
para
and a
colocar un
transgressor
sistema que
to
es en sí mismo transgresor y disruptor
go against
por
a system
cómo
that is
está
transgressor and
planteando un
disruptive because of
conflicto
the way
entre
in
el
which it
capital y la
proposes
vida.
a conflict
O sea, que este
between
conflicto
capital and life.
exista,
The fact that this
eso
conflict
sí es
exists,
transgresor.
that is
Eso sí es
transgressor.
absolutamente
That
disruptivo.
is absolutely disruptive.
El sistema capitalista,
The capitalist system,
heteropatriarcal, colonialista,
patriarchal, colonialist,
racista,
racist,
extractivista, todos los
extractivist,
istas
and all of
que os
the
puedan ocurrir,
ists that you may think of,
solo permite cambiarlo
only
a través de medidas disruptivas y
can be
transgresoras.
changed through disruptive
trata de
and
hacer
transgressor
pequeños
measures.
cambios
It is not
incrementales,
about
arreglar
small
un poquito
incremental
para esconder
changes, fixing
o
this little bit
poner
to
un poquito
hide
de género
this,
en las políticas
or adding
climáticas,
some
un
gender
poquito
to
de
climate policies,
anti-racismo
adding a
en las
sprinkle of
políticas climáticas, un
anti-racism
poquito
in
de
climate policies,
regenerativo en las
a
políticas
pinch of
climáticas.
regeneration
Significa,
in
como decía Yayo,
climate policies.
cambiar el
As Yayo
sistema
said,
entero, cambiar el
what we
modelo,
have to
es
do is
otra
change the
peli.
entire system. It's a completely different movie.
Esto
it's a completely different story. Either we do this in a transdisciplinary manner than any other trans you can think of, where we overflow what's binary and the fact that capital is at the center and life and everything that sustains life is around it. And we need to place the life of the center and the markets at the service of this life. If we do not conduct this radical change that we can call transgressor, then tell me, what are we doing here? And I think these three extraordinary individuals, because it's true that we need intention to go towards this transgression. It does not come up spontaneously. The system is very well designed for everything to be at its service. So wanting to go away from that means you need to go the extra mile, you need extra effort, you need intention. And the least we can do is, once we've opened the gates, we need to go through those gates, all of us, and turn the iceberg around, the iceberg that has at the bottom all of the discrimination and inequality, discrimination and inequalities that are invisibilized, normalized. We need to turn the iceberg around, and we can only do it with those who have the guts, to make that first push. I will introduce Shakila Islam, our first guest today. Hi, Shakila.
How are you? Can you hear me? Yes. So Shakila Islam, she's a youth leader and activist from Bangladesh. She's amplifying the voices of the young people and communities most affected by our crisis, by today's crisis. And she's putting all the effort in supporting the most unheard. From the climate emergency to the COVID to the Rohingya refugee humanitarian crisis, Shakila is the vice chair of the Bangladesh Model Youth Parliament. She's the co-founder and the chief coordinator for the YouthNet for Climate Justice, and she's a founding member for Fridays for Future in Bangladesh. Shakila as well, she advocates especially for women and girls and has represented the Bangladeshi young people at the ICPD, the International Conference on Population and Development, in Nairobi's summit on sexual and reproductive health rights and climate and climate justice in the climate sessions. And she very much put her efforts on a quote that she's saying about, we youth are unheard, but we are not voiceless. So Shakila, the floor is yours. You are most welcome, and it's my honor to be with you here today.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and welcome Barcelona. I'm really happy to getting such a great opportunity. This happiness is not only for me, it is a matter of joy for all the youth of my country, because today I'm explaining our vulnerability due to the climate change and role of the young people in Bangladesh tackling climate crisis. I would like to thank you, Atlas of the Future, and also Oxfam and others co-partnered for arranging a great event. It would be very special for me if I could came before, but it was not possible due to the visa complication. Actually, everyone is talking about women empowerment, women engagement, women participation at grassroots level, but you were preventing us from taking position. Okay, anyways, already Sandra, I'm introducing myself. I'm just a little bit introducing myself. I'm Shakila Islam, I'm from Bangladesh, and recently I'm working with YouthNet for Climate Justice. It's a large young climate network in my country, and I'm telling you a little bit about my family and my current position. I was born in Burishal. It's a climate-prone and registered risk coastal area of Bangladesh. The main source of income in my family was agriculture, but in 2007, when I was only 12 years old, our family was hit by super cyclone Sidor. an extreme natural disaster that affected more than 80 million people in my country. When I moved to a more urban setting with my family, and I become involved with some youth organization and learn that these natural disasters are increasing due to the effect of climate change. Our communities are facing this type of disaster, but many Asia Pacific countries like Bangladesh, we haven't not made huge contribution to this climate is on this basis. I had found a coastal edge youth movement, the same YouthNet for Climate Justice, which is the largest network for running climate advocacy and campaign in my country. Actually, young people have mobilized, are sharing their ideas. Most importantly, they have become actors that take climate action. We are working now in about 50 districts where our current priorities, women and girls empowerment, raise their voice. And also, I have been passionate about disaster risk management, tackling the climate crisis, and its multi-sectoral impact on the communities running my field work in the coastal belt. I realized how climate change is a hidden factor like lack of education, malnutrition, and soaring child marriage. However, climate change is not a popular term that the general public is familiar with it. So we raise mass awareness. YouthNet advocates, including multiple from forums, along with community outreach program, collaboration with local government and educational institution, assembling new norm youth-led organization for the common purpose of tackling climate crisis. YouthNet joined in the first global climate strike, expressing solidarity with Greta Thunberg and the Friday for Future movement to hold the global community accountable for the urgent climate action and support of the affected communities. Climate emergency, we have a more contribution another and we get many achievements, and we have a many victory like our government recently declared climate emergency, and for this declaration our team and our youth have a more contribution for this. Another victory, it's a major victory for us. Climate action was used as protest against the Koila power plant in. I think you are all know about Koila power plant. It's totally against by environment and climate. In our country, Mother Berry developed by the Bangladeshi authorities and Japan investor. This environmentally destructive move drew heavily criticism, and YouthNet held several strikes in innovative areas. Eventually, Japan pulled out funding from a major Koila power project, Matarbari 2 in Cox's Bazar. Cox's Bazar is our another district in my country, as it's the most vulnerable and most climate prone area. And our government canceled 16 out of the 21 Koila plant projects around the country after our campaign and after our movement. The countries have many plans, and we have recent Mujib climate prosperity plan. It's aimed to increase the resilience of coastal communities and the global imperative to address and adapt to climate change as a catalyst for increased economic properties, and through investment in clean energy and fossil fuels expected to create 4.1 million jobs and fossil fuel infrastructure project among others currently. YouthNet have linked a partnership with Climate Parliament, and Climate Parliament is our national body in our government to enhance climate governance by engagement of the young people for the local and national level. And also during COVID-19 situation, we working a lot for our ethnic group and our climate vulnerable people. And yeah, and recently all world saw see about our Shunamgons tragedy. YouthNet Singh volunteers are also working in the front line to deal with this crisis and tackling many issues. And climate change and SRH are also related between SRH and climate change. So I'm just taking a little, I'm telling a little about SRH situation in my country. Actually, as a human being, the sexual and reproductive health rights one of the essential rights, because sexual and reproductive is the concept of human rights applied to sexuality and reproduction. Due to the climate change, Bangladeshis women face barriers and disadvantages in nearly every aspect of their life, including access to health service, economical opportunity, political participation, and control of finance. The effect of globalization, raising age at early marriage, rapid urbanization, and better opportunity for socialization have hidden the risks of sexual transformative disease, HIV, AIDS, and unwanted pregnancy.
Yes, and actually, thank you very much, Shakila. I think it's very interesting how do you connect with your expertise, how even climate negotiations have a very important impact and they are a very great opportunity, but also risky for sexual and reproductive health rights. What's this connection that you were explaining? And actually, there is even the risk on using contraception measures and selling them on the basis of adaptation strategies. This kind of decisions are like straight contrary to any kind of right to bodily autonomy and to any kind of sexual and reproductive health rights. We thank you very much. We're very much short on time. We thank you very much for sharing on how is it in Bangladesh for youth leaders like you, how are the successes that you have been achieving in the different platforms where you work and with your teams. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here, and we hope creating network with all the other activists who are around in this festival and upcoming ones. So thank you very much, Shakila. We'll be talking with our next guest today, with Magid. He is an amazing climate justice leader. Magid is a Somali-British climate justice and race activist, author, politician, and a feather ruffler, also known as a compassionate disruptor. He's the founder and director of Union of Justice, a people of color-led organization set to reverse the climate crisis and help build a Europe and the world that is equitable, just, and sustainable. He's a former member of the European Parliament, representing Yorkshire and the Humber, and he's a former Lord Mayor of Sheffield, the city in the UK. He's an elected councillor representing his community, as the first ethnic Somali, the youngest ever, and the first Green Party councillor to hold that role. He sits on the board of trustees for a European Union think tank called Friends of Europe. He also works as in the University of the Underground, an arts university, and is the co-chair for a refugee charity City of Sanctuary Sheffield. Himself was a UK refugee aged 5. He has written this book. He was making amazing signatures yesterday, The Art of Disruption, a manifesto for real change. He'll be probably talking about it later, and he authored an amazing performatic poem that I invite you to have a look on YouTube called Brexit Farewell Poem. Magid was named one of the Times Magazine 100 Rising Stars Shaping the Future of the World. And Magid is here. Please join us.
Gracias.
Thank you very much for that very blushing remarks and introduction. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Magid. The clicker is not working.
I don't know where you I think probably...
Oh,
yeah.
It's working. Let's take some time. So I guess we've all got our own personal stories of how we all kind of got involved in the climate movement. For me personally, it was 3 specific stories that really brought it home for me and that show the really dark side of the climate crisis. The first story was a school in my city, Sheffield, that had to be closed down. It didn't get closed down due to getting really poor school results or having some sort of scandal. It closed down because the air pollution in the surrounding area was that bad that the local authority and the health department said that it was no longer fit for the school to be open just due to the risk that it was having on the children, so they kind of shut it down. And that was the first case of a school in the UK having to be closed down due to the climate crisis. The second story is the story of a young girl called Ella Kissy Deborah. I'm not sure if any of you have seen her picture or seen her name before. She was a 9-year-old girl from Lewisham in southeast London. And she unfortunately had 28 seizures and also went to hospital 28 times due to not being able to breathe properly. And what makes her case really interesting is that she was the first person in the UK to die of air pollution, in the sense that it was on her death certificate, it was recognized that the cause of her death was air pollution due to the area that she lived in, which was predominantly full of minority ethnic people, but just to the high levels of air pollution. And I've got no doubt that I don't think she's the first person that was to die of air pollution in the UK or any part of the world, but it was the first person that got recognized for it, basically. And then the third story that really, I guess, got me hooked and kind of just drove it close to home was hearing stories of my mother. So like my mother, we grew up in Somalia, and my mother comes from a background of raising cattle and agriculture as a way of living. That's how they survived. And she would always tell me stories of how she had pet camels and all sorts of things. But then hearing recent stories of her telling me how the devastating droughts have had an impact in her village, and now as a result that all the livestock within her family and her cousins have all basically died, and as a result potential starvation, and it's just one of the other kind of consequences of weather changing. So I guess it kind of really links down to like the aspect of climate justice being also campaigning for racial justice. We can't separate the two. Like, we have to also kind of acknowledge that it is an inequality and race issue. Is that it just happens to be that those people who are most affected by the climate crisis are those people who are from marginalized communities. And in all honesty, we have to kind of have some sort of rapid and radical sort of change to kind of, otherwise it's just going to add itself to all the other historical injustices that black and brown communities and marginalized communities already face and endure at the moment. So I guess one of the things I was doing last year was I was like looking for solutions of things that I can do to try and help solve this, or just try and feel as if like I was contributing. And one of the things I did was look at different climate organizations and different climate spaces. And one thing that was very evident and very clear was the fact that in every space it was dominated by predominantly white people and not necessarily those who were at the forefront of the climate crisis. And it kind of really lacked the representation of those people who needed to be represented. And of course, as much as I love so many different people like your David Attenborough, your Greta Thunberg, who are doing so many amazing jobs, there was lots of different narrative that was missing from the story of the climate crisis. So I basically was like, how amazing would it have been if we were to make sure that there was in every conversation, in every table, that there was somebody from a marginalized community that basically was present in those conversations. So what I did was I challenged myself to reach out to 20 different people across Europe, whether that be researchers, academics, artists, elected and politicians, to see if there was something that we could collectively do together. Because one of the things I learned earlier on is that you can't do things by yourself. Change happens when you're working collectively. So I reached out to 20 people, and this is just 6 of the 20 people that sit on our advisory board of Union of Justice. So not sure if anybody recognizes the lady in the top right. Her name is Rita Basajo. She is a Spanish MP and also the Director General for Equalities and Diversity in the Ministry of Equality, and she's one of the people on our advisory board. So we kind of like looked into different people from across Europe, the activists, and we kind of all came together to be like, let's all use our resources to try and do something. And that's when last year we kind of put together Union of Justice. So Union of Justice is a European climate organization that focuses on the intersection between climate, race and marginalized communities, and there's 3 principles or 3 pillars that we kind of focus on. The first one being empower. And it's really important for us to kind of really build a network, a vibrant network of people from different backgrounds from across Europe who come from marginalized communities, to give them the skills and the tools that they need to bring about change within their community. So that comes in the shape of training and mentoring, capacity building support, but also providing the space for people to come together and share ideas and share best practice. And one of the things that we kind of noticed was the fact that somebody who's living in Sweden, their main focus in climate justice may be a bit slightly different. They may be focusing on a just transition. To somebody in the UK may be focusing on air pollution, but fundamentally there was a lot that we were learning from each other. So it was providing that space, because one of the things I also kind of realized was that a lot of organizations and just NGOs in general is that there's a big disconnect between the people that they claim to represent and engaging with those people. So it was important for us that we were very embedded within the network of those communities that we were representing. The second pillar of our organization is influence. We don't shy away from saying that we're not a neutral organization. We will loudly and proudly campaign and advocate for any policies or positions that in line with our values of social justice, climate justice, and racial justice. And a lot of the time means working with different elected representatives. And one of the real issues that we kind of kept coming again and again was, has it been 10 minutes already? Okay, I'm going to speed. So there was a big issue in terms of like research, and there not being any research on how the climate crisis really impacts marginalized communities. So that's one of the big projects that we're doing at the moment. And then the third part is basically change, where we kind of campaign. So earlier on, this year we did a campaign and looking at how we can center racial justice at the heart of the European Green Deal. And one of the campaigns we're going to be doing in December is looking at climate reparations, but specifically looking at what's Europe's responsibility, because we believe Europe's got a moral obligation to the rest of the world. So we're looking at specifically climate, how we can erase and cancellation of debts. And I'll stop it at that, basically, and I'm sure the lovely guests will have lots of questions, and I look forward to speaking. Thank you. Too close?
Yes, please. Yeah, thanks very much. Actually, yesterday we were exchanging a little bit around Magid's book, and it's been very interesting to see how Union of Justice is organized, whereas the motto and what's the core of the organization. I was thinking, what's bringing to someone who is just pessimistic and like really not faithful about like any possibility of change, to dare to hope, really to have this dare to hope, which is quite disruptive in this system. No, I was thinking on this quote on there is no such thing as gender neutrality. There is no such thing as racial neutrality. There is no such thing as capitalistic neutrality. I think it's like what makes this shift over the dare to hope?
Yeah, I think the alternative is too bleak. Like, because a lot of times it's, yes, we need to have hope, but hope in itself, like, if there's no action that comes with hope, it just becomes a wish. So we have to kind of couple that hope with some sort of action. Otherwise, because hope in itself can be a bit too spectatorial, it just seems something that's very just in the distant kind of thing. But I think we don't have to look far. And I think a lot of the times is when we think of the climate crisis, we may think of something that's happening really far away, but it's really happening. If we look close, it's happening within our communities, within our friends, whatever. So it's like we can't afford not to do anything. The damage of not doing anything is a lot worse, kind of thing. And it reminds me of, there's a quote by a philosopher called Abraham Josh Heschel, which basically goes, the indifference is more insidious than evil itself. So it's the fact that we can't just choose not to do anything. But that doesn't mean I don't expect everybody to be like, right, I'm going to take a placard, I'm going to start. I think we've all got some degree of influence. There's somebody here might be a great baker, somebody might be a great writer. Just use whatever God-given talent that you've got to just do something. And if at the very least, all we can do is have conversations, even if it means difficult conversations with our friends and family. Yeah, that actually, we have this idea of having these courageous conversations in Oxfam, but not courageous just because it takes a lot to, but it just, it should be talk about it. There's no chance to not talk about that. It's like the elephant in the room that you used to say, in England as expression. And also, as disruptive practices, as you're saying, we don't expect that people just get out from here. But what's a disruptive attitude? What's a disruptive tone, practice for you? In people's everyday lives, and work. How is it? Yeah. I think the first thing is authenticity. It really kind of plays a big role in terms of the way I kind of do a lot of work, in the sense of we have to be very honest with kind of who we are and kind of bring our whole selves. Because a lot of time, yes, it can be easy just to try and fit in and not wanting to be the person that's going to stand out the crowd and trying to say, no, maybe we should do this, or should. So there's an element of definitely being authentic, especially when there's so much. Because I feel a lot of the times it's people want to police how much you should say, or maybe you should tone it down. Or one of the things that really frustrates when people say, but we always do it like this. So people are always somehow scared of change to a certain degree, so they always stick to traditions. And I always love to say tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. We don't have to kind of focus on that, but it's just being able to. And the other thing is taking risks. Because I think a lot, understanding that, yes, you might fail. It doesn't mean that everything's going to work out fine, but it's just understanding that you have to be able to take risks to kind of really see whether you're going to succeed or fail, in the pursuit of some sort of great endeavor. Yeah, I think actually when I get this response, we always did it this way here, it's actually the world kept moving. So if you always did it this way, it's moment to, start just aligning with the world's moves. Definitely, and I think people sometimes forget that the current system we live in, and somebody designed it. It just didn't. All our problems just didn't come from the heaven; they were man-made. You can argue mainly by men in suits, but it's good human decisions can change. So it doesn't have to be like this. So I guess it's just trying to get people to kind of have this alternative, positive future, and feel the agency, the authorship. I can be author of my destiny, life at least. Exactly. Let's see if there is any question in the audience. I think maybe interesting to get some views. If there is a mic over here. If you can just wait the microphone coming.
My name is Jaume, and I am going to shut a disruptive idea. Okay? Why not create a coin with two dimensions? One dimension is your benefit, and the second dimension is the environmental benefit. It creates a new pragmatism, not only the ourself pragmatism, if not, the second pragmatism is two-dimensional pragmatism. My pragmatism and your pragmatism.
Right. Is that a question, comment? But no, I completely. Yeah. No, it has to be beneficial, because a lot of times it's hard sometimes people be like, well, why should I care? It doesn't benefit me. Or people don't see the fact that they may think it's something that's happening far away, or something that is happening in the future. A lot of times it's people are already suffering or going through their own difficulties in life to then start thinking about the planet and the environment kind of thing. So it has to relate to people. Like, there's no point shouting people, you need to save the, if people can't relate to it, it's not going to give them the agency to do some sort of thing.
Totally. There's one more question there. I think. Yes, I don't know if it's working.
Perfect. I'm a big fan of being disruptive and challenging everything. My only thing is, but I do notice a lot of positivity in your message. My only thing is that when I'm being disruptive, or I notice people being disruptive in certain situations, the more traditional people often get off-put by the message that you're sending out. How do you keep the positivity and the motivation there while still being disruptive, but without like really triggering a defensive response?
Yeah. What's your name?
Take.
Take. Do you know what is? I think we just have to accept that we can't please everybody. Like it's impossible basically, and it's just basically just understanding that as long as I do things with conviction, because sometimes people can get stuck by trying to please everybody that they're doing nothing at all kind of thing. So it's just coming to and being comfortable with people being annoyed at you, or kind of, if anything, like honestly, sometimes people being frustrated is not a bad thing. For me, it's as long as people are engaged, like as long as they're passionate, whether they hate it or love it, they're still engaging. And I think that's what matters at the end of the day, because sadly we don't live in a utopia where everyone kind of agrees. But at the same time, even when we are disagreeing, we have to do it in a joint process that we're both doing. We're in some sort of truth-seeking process where we even have to understand the fact that we're fallible. We haven't got a monopoly on truth. We could be wrong, so we have to be listening to other people, but fundamentally be like, yeah, it comes with the territory of trying to change, basically.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we should move on. Thanks very much, Magid. It was a pleasure being with you.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
See you. Y ahora tenemos con nosotros a Gabriela Franco Prieto.
Now we have Gabriela Franco Prieto from Colombia. I don't know what time in the morning it is for her right now.
Gabriela Franco is a
feminist activist for climate justice in Colombia and leader of the youth movement for global negotiation, a movement. In fact, we met in Glasgow 1 year ago. In person, Gabriela is an environmental journalist and eco-feminist. She knows that building peace and climate action is intrinsically binary. We cannot have one without the other. She is a member of Fridays for Future and the Alliance for Climate, and author of Totuma, a digital project which seeks to create a safe space for climate activism and gender activism, which is not that obvious in the global south. Gabriela states that the current narrative that is not working is the one that nature and environment are separate from social problems. So thank you very much, Gabriela, for being awake at this time to be here with us. Hello.
El floor es todo tuyo.
The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra. I hope that everyone is all right. It's an honor to share this space with people such as Magid, Shakila, Yayo. Of course, I'm inspired by a lot, and Gabriela Bucher too. I wanted to tell you more about my actions and movement in activism, which started slightly different to the story of many. I did not started as an environmental activist at first. My first approach to activism was based on the transition of conflict to peace in Colombia. I was 15 years old. I was negotiating the peace agreement to end the 62-year internal conflict, and I was part of a group of young people who could not vote because we were not yet 18 in favor of the peace agreement, but we did want to promote peace, the building of peace, in the sense of what that could bring us and our future. And we couldn't say anything or have a decision on the future that was going to affect us. And this is very similar to the situation we have now, where many young people who are moving and speaking up to have an effect on a future that will directly affect them, and that is not taking their voices and opinions into account, or does not allow them to have an influence as many other institutions and agencies are. So the relationship between activism of building of peace and climate action is not that direct, but it is related in so many ways. So I wanted to talk about climate justice and social justice, or why human rights should also be at the center of the climate justice debate. I am Colombian, and Colombia, for third year in a row, continues to be the most deadliest country in the world to be an environmentalist defender or earth defender. And as with the effects of the climate crisis that are essentially felt in the global south, the effects of violence, which are climate activists or environmental activists, is also felt the most in the global south. After Colombia, there's Mexico, with the highest figures of killings, in the Philippines, and in 2021, out of the 227 defenders of the environment who were killed around the world because of their work, 226 were killed in the global south countries and only one in the global north. And within these countries, Asia, Latin America, and Africa, up to 95% of killings of activists, well, the perpetrators do not face legal action, specifically if it's women. If they're reporting some threats against their lives or their families or their communities, sometimes they also need to face stigma by authorities, and in 99% of the cases with women are not solved. It is also an issue of racial justice, because 1/3 of the killings was done, or violence was done against tribal communities, although they only represent 5% of the global population. And in Colombia, this is perfectly noticed, because 1/3 of the killings in 2029, which was 69 people, were Afro-Colombian people or people belonging to indigenous villages. So I would like to add here that being an environmental defender or activist in any part of the world is totally different. And although we are aboard the same boat, facing this fight against climate change is different in the global north, global south. A black person, white person, an indigenous person, a woman or a man. So you were talking about being rebels and movement and mobilization strategies, but I would like to bring along the topic of youth movements and tell you how worldwide movements led by Greta Thunberg could not have or use the same strategies in 2019 that in the different countries of the global south, because one movement, one single movement, could be the reason for loss of life or sight. You could be arrested for a climate cause in the UK, but in Colombia, in movement, where there's a history of police abuse, specifically in last year's demonstrations in 2021, we see over 800 young people who disappeared in the hands of the public enforcement agencies. So this should not be seen, being rebel should not be seen in the same way in all different contexts. And talking about the privilege I have of being in an urban environment, having access to the social media, and being able to face all this without having to suffer the consequences of my colleagues. And still I have seen how we are sent the police over when we do urban reforestation actions. We have been gassed while peacefully demonstrating.
Gabriela, sí, a propósito de lo que estás explicando, igual es interesante que compartas
interesting maybe for you to share the strategies that you have used in La Totuma precisely to establish a safe space for activism, specifically with this ecofeminist perspective, which is as important as you're saying, precisely given the risks that you face. So what has worked for you? What are you trying out? What are you finding useful? Yes, well, I wouldn't only like to talk on behalf of Totuma, but also different colleague women activists, either from other movements, very creative movements, who understand the context of violence in the country. They're not only environmental activists, but also they're activists for social justice and for peace and for indigenous movements. So a recent victory that we had was the approval of the Escazú agreement for the defense of environmental leaders in the Congress in Colombia. We have been for 3 years trying different strategies to get it approved, and the debate was just diluted because of corporate interests who did not want for this to be signed, and this brings greater information to communities and greater participation in communities to decide upon what happens on their territories. And this agreement, the promotion was done through social media because we know that is a safer space for many, and sometimes we have more direct contact with Congress members and decision makers, and also through arts and creativity. We have seen that many people are joining the cause. My colleague Daniela Rebolledo, she is artist and climate and activist. She led a Country of Orange handkerchiefs in favor of this. They filled up the Congress on the day of approval and the square right outside Congress with activists to supporting the movement. And through this type of strategies that not necessarily are hugely obvious, but they are creative, and we have seen that art has been a way of doing this, and another strategy has been the Totuma. So having this articulation through other movements who have similar interests, so articulating with the feminist movement, a movement that is very legitimate, with strategies and an organization, we see a joint concern, and we are joining forces, and they are joining our own demonstrations and protests with the power they already have. Same thing with other movements. Movements of cyclists, movements for mobility, urban recyclers. We have worked a lot on joining forces in this sense, and it has made us very hopeful too to meet other people who from their trenches, so to speak, They are flourishing in many different initiatives. Thank you very much, Gabriela. I think these are two strategies, or at least this framework. Well, in fact, the next session is Will Creativity Save Us? I think that you are already talking about very daring strategies. They're normally peripheric ones, but they are very central to it all. We now need to move on with Javier Gacio. You know him, he's here with us. Thank you very much, Gabriela, for being here with us today. I hope we can meet soon. Thank you.
Bueno, como anticipaba, levanto
As I was anticipating, we have Javier Gacio here. He's a colleague from Intermón, Oxfam. And we have different projects in Latin America, in Africa, and Europe, and is currently leading the coordination of different movements. So it's an honor to have him here. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Sandra. Buenos días, ¿cómo estáis? Espero que estéis bien.
Hello, thank you very much. I hope you're all good. I'm very happy. It is a privilege to be here.
Y estoy muy inspirado después de un día y medio escuchando
I am very inspired
pues,
after
historias
a day
de
and a
tantas
half
personas y
listening
muy
to
agradecido
stories
a
of
todas
so
las
many
personas que
people.
hacéis posible este
And I'm so
espacio.
grateful to all those of you who make this possible.
Para quienes trabajamos en justicia social y seguramente
And for
os
those of
pasará
us who work
también
in
a,
social
bueno,
justice,
muchas
and probably this
personas
happens to many of
trabajando
you
en cualquier cosa,
who work in any field,
cuando nos centramos mucho en los problemas,
when we
pues queremos
focus a
hacer
lot
este
on
análisis
problems, we
detallado
want
para
to do
poder
this detailed
tener
analysis,
la
to
granularidad
have
y abordar y pensar en
granularity and
soluciones, ¿no?
to
Pero a veces
approach
podemos
and
caer
think of solutions, but
en el
sometimes
error
we may
de
make the
creer
mistake
que
of
estamos,
believing
en lugar de fixing the future, lo estamos
that
fucking, ¿no? Un
instead of
poco,
fixing
en
the
lugar
future,
de-
we are fucking the
En lugar
future.
de arreglarlo, como que lo
Instead
estamos
of fixing
jodiendo.
it, we're fucking
Entonces,
it.
por eso es tan importante
So
estos
this
espacios
is why these spaces are
para
so
compartir,
important.
poner,
To
poner en común, ¿no? Estas
share
miradas desde todos los
these
ángulos, las soluciones que estamos
views from all
creando
angles, the solutions that we're
para
creating
definir este nuevo sistema, ¿no?
to define this new
Bien,
system.
entonces vamos a hablar ahora unos 28
So
minutos
now for about 28 minutes,
y, sobre activismo
we
juvenil
will talk about youth
por la
activism.
justicia climática. No voy a hablar yo
For
todo el
climate
rato,
justice, I
vamos a
will
tener
not
aquí
be the sole speaker. We
a
will
dos
have
activistas,
two
maravillosas.
activists, two wonderful activists.
Y lo que sí que quiero comentar antes, dentro del
And what I
proyecto en el que
wanted to
estoy
say
implicado
before we
junto
start
con
is within the
Oxfam y muchas
project that
colegas
I
que
work
estamos
in
aquí
together with
también,
Oxfam and many other colleagues here,
hicimos una encuesta el año pasado
we
a
conducted a
6.000
survey last
jóvenes
year to
en
6,000 young
países de Europa,
people
a
in
1.000
6
jóvenes
European
en
countries,
España,
1,000 in
y
Spain.
unos de los
And
resultados
one of the
fueron que el
results was that
76% de las personas de
of
entre
people
15 y 29 años en
between 15 and 29 years of
creen
age
que
in
la
Spain
crisis climática va a
believe
aumentar
that the
las
climate crisis
desigualdades.
will
Y el
increase inequalities, and
65% de
65%
ellas
of them
piden y quieren ser escuchadas
want
y formar
to
parte de
be
las soluciones.
heard
A mí
and want to
este
be a part of the
resultado
solution.
me llamó
And
la
this
atención sobre todo
result
por
struck
dos
me
cosas.
for two
Una,
reasons
la
mainly.
gran conciencia que tienen las
One
generaciones
is
más jóvenes
the
de la
huge
interseccionalidad
awareness
y
of
de
younger
de
generations about the intersectionality
complejidad de la
and
crisis
the
climática.
complexity of the
No
climate
llega en el
crisis.
vacío la crisis climática, como
The
hemos
climate
visto,
crisis is
como
not an
sabe
island,
Gabriela,
as Gabriela just reminded us. The wave comes, but it depends on many other factors and pre-existing inequalities. Depending on these factors and inequalities, you can serve the wave on, or it will engulf you. And this is why it's so important to talk about privilege and race and education, inequalities, geography. And this is intersectionality, and young people already have this knowledge integrated. And the second element that attracts my attention is this willingness to do things, the fixing mode. We want to be in the picture, we want to be in the meetings, we want to have a voice, and we want to co-create the new system. Having said this, it is an honor to me to present Diego and Naiara, who are here. If you please want to come to the stage. Welcome. Welcome. Naiara is a physics engineer and a master's in renewable energies. For 3 years, she's been mobilized and acting for climate justice together with Fridays for Future, Barcelona. And she has a quote that fascinates me because of how clear it is. I will read it. I don't want to change anything because it's beautiful. She reminds us that we must transition towards eco-feminist worlds where life is worth more than capital. Well, it's so very clear. Life is valued more than capital, and that's everything. I don't need to say anything else. Thank you and welcome, Naiara. It's a pleasure to share this space with you. And then Diego, welcome. You just got here this morning. You had other prior engagements and you got here on time, and it is a pleasure to share this space with you. He is an oceanographer and environmentalist from Vigo. He is a founder of Naturiza, an AV channel devoted to climate and scientific education in Galician, your beloved motherland, and he collaborates with digital platforms. He writes in El Salto and Climática, and he's a disseminator in social media, especially Twitch, which is one of the most famous social media now. Welcome, consider yourself at home. Now we will start talking and getting to know more about your work, but first we would like to show you a video to present the Spark project, and also because it infuses with energy. We recorded most of it during a trip to COP with several young people. You may see some familiar faces, and after the video we will continue with the talk.
We want! What do we want?
El proyecto Spark es una iniciativa de 20 organizaciones, Oxfam Intermón en España, para movilizar a la juventud por la justicia climática.
Es un proyecto que recoge, amplifica, apoya a las voces de los jóvenes que están demandando unas soluciones inmediatas y reales para un futuro sostenible y justo para todos.
Rocky is going to inspire us with his experience and vision and insights around climate justice.
Thank you so much for your team, Oxfam, once again.
Engloba todas las razones por las cuales creo que es importante luchar. Es una intersección entre la justicia de género y la justicia climática.
En Spark, desde el principio, decidimos integrar una dimensión transformadora de la justicia de género. Queríamos visibilizar y nombrar las desigualdades estructurales que impiden que la justicia climática lo sea para todas y para todos.
Para luchar contra la crisis climática es importante tener en cuenta no solo la justicia climática, sino también la justicia social.
In this kind of society, they like women to be quiet, but I'm not, and that's why I'm here today.
Buscamos abrir espacios de comunicación, de formación y de movilización para aprender juntas en este reto global para atajar la crisis climática.
Estoy aprendiendo un montón y me encanta porque el foco está en apoyar activistas jóvenes que quieren dar un paso más allá.
Nos da la posibilidad de conocer un montón de activistas de alrededor del mundo y enterarnos de todo en primerísima mano.
Estamos trabajando más allá de las fronteras con jóvenes del movimiento climático
en Europa y en África y en el Pacífico y en América Latina.
We want to ask you to rethink what sort of youth you want to give us, young people, so that we no longer have to carry the weight of the world as we grow up in a global emergency.
Bueno, pues entonces vamos allá.
Okay, so let's get down to it. Naiara, we'll start with you. And tell us a bit about how is it going from physical engineering to climate activism? How were these years with Fridays and how have you gotten here? All of these years with Fridays have been years of personal growth and movement. I started in 2019. I joined them when all of the assemblies were being created in different places in the world. It's an international movement, and I helped prepare the strike of 27 September, which was a huge demonstration, and it exceeded all of our expectations, and it has been growing demonstration after demonstration. And what we did during that year was we got the climate emergency into the political agenda. We got many institutions to declare a climate emergency, and then, well, of course, there are empty words, that's a different story, but we managed to get the climate emergency and social justice into the media and political agenda. And after this big demonstration in Barcelona and in different places, then the Madrid COP was held in December 2019, which was another big tour de force, a big show of force of the citizens and the counter-COP demonstrations on the streets. As Yayo said, there we see what's important, and the voices that are oftentimes dismissed are heard there, the voices that have the experience to change things. And then the pandemic hit, and these stopped everything we had planned for 2020, which was a lot, and then it was difficult to mobilize again, as in all social movements. Bringing people out on the streets again was difficult. We did manage it last year in a huge demonstration here in Barcelona. We participated with many other green movements against the extension of the Barcelona airport, not just Barcelona but all airports, because in the end we believe it doesn't make sense to compromise our future investing in fossil structures. It doesn't make sense, and these are policies that just continue with this wheel of infinite growth. And well, I've worked with many movements, climate movements within Barcelona, as well as social movements. We've worked with a housing movement, anti-racist movements, understanding also the intersectionalities. And as Gabriela said, being in the global south is not the same as doing activism with the privilege that we have. And beyond all this, I've gotten to know so many people during this time, and they are a source of support and, yes, a mutual support group where we share knowledge, people coming from different places with different experiences, and well, we have contributed a lot to one another. That's great. You are illustrating these 2.0 consciousness of the new generations, of this intersectionality and diversity regarding your own bodies and connections with other movements in Colombia and others. Thank you very much. And now we will talk a bit more about a couple of points that you mentioned that I'm sure are interesting. But Diego, you were in Fridays as well, right? You started on a different corner of Spain, and then you went to this, you turned to the social media to make things clear, to speak the truth and say the things as they are. Yes, I wanted to see climate science from within. This is why I dived into the pool. I did a master's in oceanography to get to know a bit more, but as you said, I was in Fridays, I was one of the promoters of the movement in Vigo, and then for different circumstances I had to move to Madrid, and during the lockdown and the pandemic I knew perfectly well, and everyone is aware of the distance between science and society, this big road that we need to cover when we convey scientific knowledge to society. I focus on climate science and ecology for several reasons, mainly because I like it. This is something that I like and I like doing, but mainly because I believe it is a need and a right of citizens to know what is happening, the consequences, the potential consequences and solutions of what we can do in the end. And I say it very humbly, not because of what I do, but generally speaking, all sorts of events that disseminate, raise awareness, I see them as citizen empowerment, so as to face the greatest challenge of the 21st century, which is the climate crisis.
This is how I started. Then I tried out different formats. I am doing something now that allows me to have bi-directional communication in Twitch, and this is not a closed video you can't interact with. This is allowing someone to interact with me. I can receive feedback. It's much more interesting in that sense. I have even done climate monologues. We have to innovate. Okay. I am just missing out on so many new things. We can look at it later. Okay, so one of the challenges to position and to communicate climate justice, and this is the intersectionality and the word justice we were talking about before, is that we should duly understand why it affects differently. Gabriela helps us being here with a body and explaining her story, with other colleagues who are also getting threats for speaking. Naiara, this is different, as you were saying. But how do you do it? How do you work on the media, on the social media, sometimes communicating figures and sometimes having to participate in debates to explain this climate inequality? How do you explain that? Well, Gabriela Bucher spoke about this before, the differences between causes and consequences. So who could be not the main one to blame, but yes, responsible for climate change or emissions or transformation of land use, which, well, mainly the privileged countries of the North Global, specifically North America and the US and Canada and Europe, the main CO2 historical emitters, and the main consequences that can be seen more in the global south. So this inequality, just to give you an example, I don't want to repeat what's been said about, Gabriela Bucher talking about climate financing with loss and damage. This is something I'm sure we will talk about in COP27 and being fair in Egypt, a country of Africa. Maybe there's something new to be brought out there, but just to give you a more graphic example, Madagascar for now, they have had a big drought, which is the first drought certified by climate change. As Magid was saying before, this is not the first one. This has been officially certified by climate change. Some others have been done greater, Madagascar. But what would be the positioning of Madagascar regarding CO2 emissions and climate change? A very clear example, another inequality. And what Franco was saying regarding activism, I remember in COP in Glasgow last year, an exchange I had with different activists. The one from Philippines, I can't remember his name, but I'm sorry for that. But we were talking informally about how we entered activism and why we did what we did. And he said, well, because I like it. And she was saying, well, I do this because literally the areas, the crop areas of my country have just been flooded by the sea. So these totally different positions, this is a privilege because there's no impairing need, but there's also safety there, as she was saying. Yes, I remember seeing this on the video, Iraqi from the Pacific. My island is just sinking, so what's my position there? And I was wanting to ask you about Spain, because in Spain, well, we have had, yes, you don't need to go to the global south or geographically far away places within the Spanish territory and the Iberian Peninsula. There's climate inequalities already. Many years we see something that is an equality, is energy poverty. This year, with the heat waves, the hottest wave registered, with heat waves of up to 42 days, this climate inequality is more tangible because of the adaptation. The healthcare institution of the Carlos III University speaks about excessive deaths because of heat, and the first case of first cause of heat death, well, people with cardiovascular problems or diseases, but the main problem is the class you belong to or the purchasing power you have, because you cannot adapt to climate change or have an energy efficient house. They were also talking about prices of electricity. So that's why I like to say that climate change is studied from different scientific positions and increasingly interdisciplinary, but the necessary transitions to solve climate change are more and more interdisciplinary in that sense too. In this case, for instance, the control of electricity price by a government who can regulate it and allow people to be warm in winter and be at a normal friendly temperature in the summer. Okay, so it looks like scientists at the end of the day, you were right, and we're seeing this in our pockets, wallets, in our day-to-day life here, with all our privilege included, of course. So what do we do with this? Let's go to, let's switch to our fixing mode. Naiara. Sometimes a lot is expected from the youth, from young people, so I wanted to ask you, what is the role, in your opinion, what role do you young people have and what challenges too? I think that we, as young women, have the role of bringing climate emergency to the table and the fact of moving towards climate justice. This climate justice issue is what covers many more things than the ones we mentioned. It covers talking about, well, the most affected people being the ones least responsible for all this, and all the inequalities we find in the global North and South global, and also things that are affecting us here directly and that we can see as more tangible as energy crisis. This is not something caused by the war in Ukraine, as the media also states. This is a systemic crisis that goes far beyond all this, and we are entering this crisis because we are reaching the biophysical limits of the planet. We cannot have an economy that is endlessly growing and that wants to be based on that myth of let's continue growing and growing when we are living in a physically system that is limited and a planet that is limited too. So in order to do this and solve the energy crisis, we will have to go through change. This needs to also entail a democratization, to place life ahead of profit. People can have heat and water and electricity in their homes and have all these basic services in the power of people. So to make all these systems democratic, and I think it's somewhat hypocritical that we're now in a conference funded by ACBAT. ACBAT has the privatization of water here in Catalonia and other countries in Latin America too, and is preventing the municipalization, which would also be One of the potential answers to the climate emergency, as was said yesterday too, in the case of energy, in the case of water, in the case of housing, we need to take control of all these services so that citizens can decide what to do and what not to do. We are going to experience scarcity times. We're not going to live in abundance times as we were, also at the expense of exploiting other countries, of the neo-colonialism in which we live. Because, well, at the end of the day, colonial logics are being repeated, and we cannot expect for this change of system to go towards only changing technologies and continuing with the same logics, because we will continue having the same problems with material extraction from the same places in the global south and increasing inequalities more than reversing them. We will continue having unfair inequalities. So this is where us young people are trying to work on. Our first memories are of the 2008 crisis, a crisis we have not yet left behind. We are then going to go into the labor market, and COVID comes along, another crisis which is coming along now, and it's crisis after crisis after crisis. And within this picture, well, there's the mental state also to deal with and how we are projected in the future. This is something also to be borne in mind. One of the challenges we have is how to recover our hope, how to recover our future, so as to speak, because it's been stolen, and to go beyond that. Thank you very much.
Bueno, me imagino.
Okay, I can imagine that we could talk about challenges for a long time, but we continue with our fixing mode. And the question someone asked to Magid in the previous session, how can we keep this joy and the change from the joy and from the creativity, and creating a network as we're doing here, and having the uncomfortable conversations and the provocative questions. We have someone from Akbar here. We can ask the uncomfortable questions because we need to have these conversations. We are seeing this now, so it's fabulous. Okay, last question for both of you. We have an autumn in the global north and spring in the global south. It is full of things, as was explained before. So what are the, Diego, I'm going to ask you, what do you see as the most key topics within the climate justice? What angles are the most important now? And Naiara, could you please give us the dates on the calendar? What do we need to mark and round up in our calendar to go out in the street with Fridays, to just do stuff in the next few months? Diego, you can start if you want. Okay, as I was saying before, the energy crisis that we used to have, and the fact that it's become more serious now because of the Ukraine war, will continue to be here, to be present, will continue to be what all the news talk about, and that's where we will see the inequality in the energy transition we're seeing in the European Union. Well, that is more or less aimed at something. Now the only energy transition is to know where to take gas from, not from Russia, so we need to take it from the US. The first liquefied natural gas imported in Spain in August, and Israel. We must maybe rethink this. Just not taking gas at all, that would be ideal. Not where to take it from. So climate inequalities, extractivism, etc., that will continue to happen. The COP topic would also be in conversation. And for 2023, there's two things. There's the review of the Spanish legislation for energy transition and climate change, and the Paris Agreement. The checklist needs to be done on countries to see how they're doing with that. So I think that's for 2023. For autumn and winter, the energy crisis will continue to be there. We will speak about it, energy poverty in the winter, problems arising from heating mostly, I guess. Okay, so in that role of being leaders and sometimes saying what we must do, what are the dates? Well, based on this, we have the date of the next Friday, which is Worldwide Climate movement, and what we do here is energy crisis too, because how we need to know how this affects differently to different people. And beyond this, we are going to move to the COP, to COP on 12th of November. There will also be different movements around Spain and then in the COP too. Okay, so we have 23rd of September, Global Mobilization of Fridays for Future in Barcelona with you, and in many other places in the world, and in November during the celebration of the COP. Okay, well, thank you very much. We no longer have time. Just to finish, and Kathy, you will have the floor back. I remember that in the video that we've seen, we also managed to get together with the Euro Parliament group and the president, almost 80 activists, young people activists from different countries in Europe, and some 10 MEPs, and we could transfer and communicate 5 very clear requests that the young women read out to the MEPs. And the president, when closing, thanked for this space, because when they have to talk in the hemicycle about these topics, feeling the strength and the force that you're there at the back, Naiara, Diego, many of you here, helps them a lot when it comes to making bold decisions. So thank you so much, and let's continue working. Thank you.